Hey there. Thank you so much for listening. This is the Big Time Talker Podcast. I'm Burke Allen in our studios here in Washington, D.C. Thank you for listening. Our author today is going to make you smile if you're a renter. His name is Justin Pogue. He's got a book full of rental secrets to get your rent lower. We all love that, huh? The podcast brought to you by Speakermatch, speakermatch.com, the world's largest online virtual speakers bureau. Now, what does that mean? That means if you're a speaker, you're somebody that goes out and talks to folks for a living with a great message, well, you need to check out Speakermatch. Or maybe you're a meeting planner and you're looking for speakers. Speakermatch.com has a great virtual marketplace. You can find one another. That's speakermatch.com. We have brand new episodes of the podcast downloadable every Tuesday. Subscribe now at Spotify, Apple, iTunes, iHeartMedia, wherever you get your podcast. All right, let's get to it. Our guest, Justin Pogue, has written a book that is now a reader's favorite award-winning book. It's called Rental Secrets. And Justin says that, look, if your rent is too high, there are ways you can reduce your rent. You get better value. You can create a better community. These are all good things. Justin, thanks for being on the show today.
So happy to be here, Burke.
So did this all begin because you felt like you were being gouged by a landlord somewhere along the way? What was the impetus to writing this book, Rental Secrets?
No, actually, this started with me actually being a landlord.
Really? Tell me about that.
Yes. So when you become a landlord, you basically become a small business owner and you take on a whole host of problems. And over the years of being a landlord, I realized the value of having quality renters who stayed with me for a longer period of time, who actually took on some of the jobs related to managing the property. So, for example, some of the renters would handle the landscaping for me, or some of them would say, oh, I see this little repair here that needs to be done. Let me handle that instead of you finding 3 qualified repair people and getting quotes and then being here when they come and all of that. That renter actually went ahead to handle that repair for me. So through that experience, I started to recognize the value of renters and how they can help the landlord actually do what he was trying to do. And then later on, I had this experience where someone actually suggested that I write a book about my real estate experiences. And I'd been doing real estate for like 20 years. And I didn't know what writing a book meant. I didn't know what that looked like. So sure. I went down to the bookstore and I'm looking at the real estate section and I see books for real estate agents and mortgage brokers and real estate insurance people and property managers and investors. But when I was standing there looking at that section in the bookstore, it dawned on me that there were no books there for renters. And that struck me as really crazy because renters are the ones who are paying over $500 billion a year. That's trillion with a T. In rent every year, and they are covering the salaries for all those different real estate professionals who already have their own books. They are covering the profit for all the real estate investors that are out there. So I really thought it was time to actually give them some secrets so that they can better participate in the rental marketplace.
Secrets is the right word, though, because I would think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that your landlord or your property management company, if you're going into one of these big complexes, don't they essentially have like all the power when you're looking for a place to live? And really, how much negotiation is involved there?
They have some power, but you have to understand that they are under pressure too. So when you walk into an apartment community, and we'll take a big apartment community. You walk into a big apartment community with a fancy property management company and all of that.
Right.
Their building is competing against other buildings in their neighborhood around them. So I've seen instances where there's a neighborhood with apartment buildings in it. There's a new apartment building that's just opened, and it's the fanciest thing. It's the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Right.
Well, the older apartment communities now, they are now looking at that, and they may start to discount their property. There may be pressure to discount their rents because the new property is more appealing. So that's part of the pressure that they're under, and it also stems from the fact that if they have a vacant apartment, every day that apartment sits vacant, they get no money, and it gets worse than that. That's money they can never recover. So they have a bias towards action today to make sure people rent their properties and get in place. So that's also.
That
Go
leads
ahead.
me to the question of saving money on your rent then. So would one of the things you would suggest be to look, if you're looking for an apartment, to look for maybe not the shiny new penny, but another perfectly great apartment in that same neighborhood, and see if there's discounting available because of that?
Yes. And actually, in fact, I've seen situations where that apartment complex that's not necessarily the newest shiny penny has actually offered free rent for a number of weeks as a way to get people's attention and get them to tour their property and rent with them, as opposed to the newer building in the neighborhood.
Let's talk about renewals, and I want to get back to saving money on your rent. But if you are one of those renters, and you said something early in the conversation that made me think about this, who stays in one place for a long time, and lease renewal conversations begin to happen after you've been there for a while, and the landlord comes and they want a large rent. Is there anything you can do as a renter? I don't know, take control is maybe a little strong wording, but to have more of a stake in those conversations rather than to just go, okay, if I want to live here, I'm going to pay another $100 a month, $200 a month.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's important to understand what happens if you stay and what happens if you go. So if you decide to move out, the landlord or property management company is now going to have to start dealing with a period of vacancy. The apartment will be empty, and we've already kind of covered that, the cost that they take on with that. But then they're also going to have to come into the apartment and have it professionally cleaned, steam clean the carpets and all that, and actually clean behind the stove, because no tenant ever cleans behind their stove.
Guilty.
And make any little repairs that the renter who was living there was overlooking while they were staying there.
Right.
And all of that costs time and money that they can't recover. I mean, it's all pure expense.
Sure.
So as a renter who's going into this renewal negotiation, you need to understand that there are going to be expenses that the landlord is going to incur should you decide to move. And those are so, and in negotiating that renewal, taking the landlord's perspective as the renter, you can now say, well, I know it's going to cost you, let's say, $1,000 to turn this apartment so it's ready for the next person. Oh, and I left out advertising. They're going to have to pay to advertise this apartment. And these websites, apartments.com and all of that, they're charging, a percentage of the rent that the landlord is charging in advertising fees. So there's all this cost tied up in turning over the apartment. And as the renter, you can say, well, I'd really like to stay, but I can't swing this $100 a month increase. So why don't we do a $25 increase, and we can move forward from there? Or would you rather be vacant for however long it takes you to turn this apartment? And also, they're not in control of how long that apartment necessarily stays vacant. That's
Sure.
up to the next renter who they haven't met yet. They don't know who that person is. They know you. You're there. You're a known quantity.
Sure.
And one more thing I'd like to mention is, since you're a known quantity, they know that you get along well with your neighbors, that you know how to treat people and you know how to act on the property. So you're not going to deter other people who might rent at the property.
Justin Pogue is our guest. The book is Rental Secrets. It's fascinating because, as he mentioned early in the conversation, there's not a lot of information out there to tell you how to save money on your rent. So this would be one of the ways that potentially you could save a buck is to when renewals come up to negotiate that out and use your position as a known quantity. What are some other tips that you pass along to folks on how to save money on rent?
Yeah, absolutely, Burke. So one of the other tips is the timing of when you choose to go looking for an apartment. So
Okay.
there's this annual cycle every year, spring and summer, when we're asking rents are at their peak. And the reason they're at that peak is because that's also the time when a bunch like 4 or 5 million kids are graduating from college. That's also the time when approximately another 4 or 5 million families are looking to move or like switch school districts and all of that. And they want to get situated before the new school year starts. And those college students want to get situated in their job before their job starts. So there's all of this churn going on in the spring and summer months. And landlords know this, and the asking rents are higher then. But if you wait till about this time of year, like November, December, there are fewer
Winter
people
time.
looking
Yeah.
because they're dealing with holidays. It's not a time of a lot of churn, but there are still apartments that become available. And getting back to our vacancy issue, well, the landlord's not going to wait until spring and summer rolls around again and miss out on 4, 5, 6 months of income so that they can get that peak rent. They're going to want to rent it now, even though there's not a lot of churn going on. And according to some surveys, and depending on what city you're in and what type of apartment you want to rent, the savings from waiting can be as high as 7%. And if your rent's $1,000, 7% is $70.
Sure. Not inconsequential dollars.
Not at all. And a lot of people's rent is higher, higher
Oh
than
yeah, yeah.
$1,000.
Yeah, no kidding. What about in an area, frankly, like where I live, that is very transient? I'm in the Washington, D.C. area. Lots of military folks get deployed overseas. They're gone a long time. Folks who work for the State Department may have an overseas thing. And so
Mm-hmm.
their apartments get left vacant for a long time. Can you use that as a negotiating tool with your landlord? Hey, I'm only going to be in this place for 4 days this month, or I'm going to be gone for the next 3 months. Can you cut me a break? Have you
Mm-hmm.
ever seen that to be a successful tactic?
Um, I have not seen negotiating for less time be a successful tactic. Although I do see a little bit of your point where if you're not actually in the apartment, there's less wear and tear on the apartment itself. Um, but what I would say is if you're not going to be in your apartment for months on end, you should talk to your landlord about the possibility of subletting, because typically leases are 12 months.
Right.
And if you live there the first 3 months and then your job calls you somewhere else and you need to move, but you don't want to let go of that apartment, then exploring the option of subletting that apartment where there's another individual who comes in and takes over your rent obligations, for a certain portion of your lease while you're away,
Right.
can be a good tactic to kind of just get out from under that obligation and let someone else handle that for you. Now that person will also have to qualify with the landlord. The landlord will have to approve that. But that is a good way. Or actually, now that I'm thinking about it, technology has given us some other options. So you may Airbnb your apartment while you're gone. That's another option to kind of get you out of some of that rent obligation.
Any idea, Justin, what the laws are around Airbnb a rental property? Is that lease specific, or how does that work?
So it is lease specific. Technically, that is something that you should discuss with your landlord. Although, having stayed at multiple Airbnbs, there are plenty of people who, for example, they have a two-bedroom apartment. They're staying in one room, they're Airbnb-ing out the second room. That has happened and it's very common. Also, some cities have different rules about registering your Airbnb or certain areas or certain neighborhoods don't allow Airbnb. So there are some rules and regulations that you're going to have to look into and make sure it works for your area.
Justin Pogue is our guest. His book is fascinating. It's called Rental Secrets. If you think your rent's too high, or maybe you're worried about that next lease renewal letter from your landlord, this is the book to pick up. It's an award winner, and it is available at bookstores everywhere and Amazon.com. Does the stuff you teach in this book vary a lot between large urban areas and small towns, or urban and rural areas, for example? Or does it kind of work everywhere?
It's interesting. The principles work everywhere. The numbers, of course, are going to be different whether you're renting in New York or LA or rural Iowa, but the principles are the same. Vacancy affects landlords everywhere pretty much the same way. If it's not rented, they don't get money, and it's money that they can't recover. I mean, nobody will pay for use of an apartment from last week. Like, nobody is that dense. It's not possible.
Gotcha.
So they lose that money. That principle is the same. The principle of them competing against the properties that are located nearby them is always in play. And that issue of when they go out and they try to rent something, they don't know who that next renter is going to be. They don't know how they're going to act. They don't know how they're going to interact with their neighbors. And that uncertainty is something that you as a renter can use to negotiate.
Our guest, Justin Pogue, has written a book called Rental Secrets. If you want to reduce the amount of money that you're paying, you want to get better value, you want to create a quality rental community, you may want to pick this up. Let's talk about that getting a better value piece. We haven't touched on that. As you're out looking for where you want to live next, what's the top one or two tips you could give us in terms of getting more bang for your buck, your rental buck?
Yeah, so absolutely. As we mentioned before, this competition piece, it can result in certain apartment buildings offering 1 to 4 weeks of free rent. In one case, I've even seen it as high as 6 weeks of free rent because of the market situation that they're dealing with.
And this is when, just to be clear, this is when there are a lot of apartment complexes in an area and there's sort of one new one. And so the other guys are no longer the brand new thing. So you look for those competitive situations.
It can be that, or it can be for some reason a large percentage of people have moved out. And by large percentage, I don't mean 50 or 60. I mean like 15%. If an apartment building has 15% vacancy, that's huge. It's normally supposed to be about 5%, 5 to 8% for regular churn. But if it's above that, then they may also offer some kind of free rent marketing opportunity, because they need to get. So what people are competing for today is really eyeballs, attention. And in order to rent an apartment, I need someone to come and tour. The more people who come and tour, the more likely I'm going to rent my apartment. But if nobody's paying attention to me and my apartment building and I get no tours, then those apartments are going to sit vacant longer. And that happens so there was one apartment community I was managing, and it's in Mountain View, California, which was a stone's throw away from Google's headquarters. I had one apartment sit vacant for a month. So even in really hot markets, apartments can sit for a while.
So you talked about you running some of these large complexes like this one in Mountain View, California. I have lived in some of those in the past. I have a son in Florida who lives in one now. when you go into the leasing office at one of those large apartment complexes and you deal with the leasing agent, how much power and flexibility does that leasing agent have to give you a discount, to give you a better unit, to give you something a little extra? Or are they basically just a placeholder and it all comes from corporate?
That person in that office, they're not just a placeholder, but you have to know how to use them in your negotiation.
Give
So
me an
no,
example.
so that person who's sitting in that office cannot just wave a wand and change your rent amount,
Okay.
but they report to someone who can. So the idea is to present your case in such a way that you're not whining, you're not arguing, but you're giving them the information and the tools to go and negotiate with their boss on your behalf. So one way that this may manifest itself is you want to live within, let's say, half hour of your job. It doesn't matter east or west or north or south. Okay. But a particular apartment community that you're looking at, they're only going to be comparing themselves against people who they consider to be their peers. So they're going to be looking at anything within a mile radius of where they are located. And they'll come up with a price and an asking rent.
Sure.
But you don't really necessarily care. You just want to be a half hour from your job.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what matters to you. So you're going to be looking at other neighborhoods that they are not looking at in terms of their marketing and how they're doing their pricing. So if you can bring actual market data points to them that are communities that you would choose to live in, because renting is very like personal and it's a market of one. Like they're trying to rent to you. You're the
Yeah.
only person in that market. So anywhere else that you would rent is their competition. So tell them who their competition is and say, like, I really like your community, but there's another community I'm looking at that's $100 a month cheaper. Can we negotiate that? Now that person in that office can go to their boss and say, look, we've got this person. They qualify. I think they'll be a great tenant, but this is what we're competing against. And then their manager will make a decision about whether they're going to come down on that asking rent and how far they're going to come down. They may not come down $100, but even if they come down 50, your rent is lower than otherwise would have been.
What about biases within the rental community? And I know that the official line I'm certain would be, oh, there is no such thing. But how much does that play into it really in 2024 in terms of they want a young hip renter, or they don't want seniors? They do want seniors. Do they look at race and ethnicity? How much of that is still a secret factor in the rental world?
So from a legal standpoint, there are fair housing laws that apply across the country, and there are specific reasons that you cannot discriminate against individuals.
Understood. But in the real world,
However, you do have communities that are specifically for 55 and over because they want a quieter, slower paced community. And I think from that perspective, they can actually advertise those communities as that. And it still does play a role. When you go to rent an apartment, like, you want to put your best foot forward. You want to present yourself as a quality renter that they can depend on to pay the rent every month, that they can get along with their neighbors and enjoy the amenities of the apartment building without putting the other neighbors out.
sure.
And I'm thinking about a specific instance where it was a apartment community in Campbell, California. It was near a community college, and there were a set of 8 Brazilian international students who came and wanted to rent 2 apartments. And it just so turned out they were on the community college soccer team. and we did go ahead and rent them the apartments. However, in this instance, what ended up happening was they invited the rest of the soccer team to come hang out at the apartment complex with them. The community courtyard was full of all the soccer players. There was instances of noise at all times of day and night. Kind of became an Animal House situation a little bit, which, as the property manager, I didn't know about because I wasn't living on site, so I didn't know what was going on after hours until I started receiving some emails from the other renters. So there are sometimes cultural issues and issues that need to be worked through. But from the property management standpoint, the property manager is supposed to be a good steward of the property and make sure the property is taken care of. And part of that is renting to everyone who can qualify if they have product, because that funds the maintenance budget, that funds the budget for improving the property. So I would say it does play a role. It plays a smaller role than I think it has in the past, which I think is definitely a positive thing.
The book is Rental Secrets. It's a reader's favorite award winner. And if you're interested in finding ways to save money on your rent, getting better value for your rental dollar, or you got a lease renewal coming up, you may want to pick it up. Where can folks find this online or find you online, Justin, if they have questions?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Burke. They can find me at rentalsecrets.net. And I actually do post tips and tricks for renters on my Instagram and Facebook accounts. And my handle there is Rental Secrets, and on Twitter I'm Rental Secret. And the book is available at Amazon.com, Barnes and Noble, and I'm glad to get it out there so I can help people with one of the pressing financial needs they have out there.
Yes, sir. This is interesting stuff, and appreciate you spending some time with us today. Thank you very much.
Very happy to have spent the time with you too, Burke.
This is the Big Time Talker podcast, brought to you by Speakermatch.com. Remember to subscribe and get new episodes every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you, Speakermatch. Thanks to our guest today, author Justin Pogue, author of Rental Secrets. Wherever you are, whatever you do, go out and make it a great day. Thanks for listening. Bye, everybody.